David, how do you account for this argument, particularly since we're coming off perhaps the worst financial crisis since the Depression, in which it was perhaps the lack of regulation which helped to cause the crisis? Why is it now that regulation is seen as such an enemy, or the regulating role of government?
Well, but I think for decades there has been an effort by interests that have had a lot of resources behind them to put forth the argument that regulations cost us, and regulations hurt jobs, and regulations impede growth, and taxes are a bad thing. Problem is, what they've said just isn't true. We had the biggest tax cuts in American history at the beginning of the last decade, and we had the first decade in American history where we had net negative job creation, in which social mobility went down, in which median incomes went down, and in which social inequality went up. That's not the way the system is supposed to work, and that's not the way those kind of cuts were supposed to benefit us. There's an argument that all regulation is bad. Well, you can have overregulation. You can have big bureaucracies slowing things down. We do right now. If we could approve the creation of power plants faster, we'd create jobs and cheaper energy, and there'd be a lot good about it. But if you do it too fast, or you do it recklessly, what happens? Well, you cut corners, there's environmental damage, there's health damage, and those things have a cost. And that's what happened with the financial crisis. We said, we bought into this argument that financial markets could be self-regulating. They overreached. It blew up. And it didn't just hurt them, because when those markets blew up, whether it's the housing markets or derivative markets, the knock-on effect was the pensions of poor people were affected. Their savings were affected. The value of their homes, in which they intended to use to retire someday, were affected. So there are big social consequences to underregulation that have costs, just as overregulation has costs.
But the debate in the upcoming presidential election seems to be pitting the one argument against the other, the Republicans standing up for little or no regulation, a very small role for the state, and the Democrats arguing the opposite.
Well, first of all, I don't think the Democrats are arguing the opposite. I think both parties are, by virtue of our system, which is unique in the world in its dependence on money and contributions, both parties are promoting the sort of establishment view. This administration promoted a financial reform bill that's a fraud. It does a little bit. It does something for consumers, but we didn't even fund the kind of oversight that the bill touts as being a centerpiece.
The so-called Dodd-Frank bill.
Right, and it was just a minor measure. We have more too-big-to-fail banks than we did before the crisis. We have more risky bank behavior, derivatives and other kind of behavior, than we did before the crisis. It was a fake. Why? Is it because they don't care? No, it's because at every step along the way, a special interest, a moneyed group, somebody whose view on this was either compromised or extremely pointed in a certain direction, pulled back a little bit. And so that's a serious problem here. We've got a system in the United States that is corrupted by money, and there is no appetite, even though we've just come through big congressional scandals, even though you've got on the left the Occupy movement, and on the right the Tea Party movement, protesting a system that's clearly unequal and clearly being run for the benefit of the people who can donate the money to it. There's no movement, because a lot of the power has been institutionalized.